What happens when you wake up to a lawyer at your door, holding papers that say your marriage is over, all because of a single night you can't take back? How far can you push someone before they finally stand up for themselves? I always thought I had the upper hand, but the truth came out in ways I never expected. The music was too loud, the drinks were too strong, and I was having the time of my life. Ethan's birthday party at his parents' house was supposed to be a quiet family gathering, but I had other plans. At 32, I wasn't about to spend another boring evening watching his family sit around making polite conversation. "Cori, maybe you should slow down a bit," Ethan whispered in my ear as I grabbed another glass of wine from the kitchen counter. His voice had that worried edge I'd grown to hate over our 8 years of marriage. "Oh, come on, honey," I laughed, spinning around to face him. "It's your birthday. We're supposed to be having fun." I took a long sip of the wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. "Your family needs to loosen up anyway." Ethan's jaw tightened. At 35, my husband had always been the quiet, steady type. He worked as an IT technician, came home every night at exactly 6:15, and never caused any drama. Sometimes I wondered if he had any passion left in him at all. "My parents went to a lot of trouble for this party," he said, glancing around nervously. "Could you please just what? Be boring like everyone else?" I gestured toward the living room, where his mother Janet was arranging napkins for the 3rd time, and his sister Abigail was helping their 8-year-old daughter Sophie with a puzzle. "Look at them, Ethan. They're acting like this is a funeral, not a celebration." Gerald, Ethan's father, walked into the kitchen carrying an empty beer bottle. At 59, he still had the broad shoulders of the factory manager he'd been before retirement, and unlike his son, he knew how to have a good time. "How's everyone doing in here?" Gerald asked, his eyes twinkling as he looked between Ethan and me. "Cori, you look like you're enjoying yourself." "Finally, someone who appreciates a party," I exclaimed, raising my glass toward him. "Gerald gets it, don't you, Gerald?" Ethan's father chuckled, but I caught the way his eyes lingered on me for just a moment too long. "Well, life's too short not to have a little fun," he said, opening the refrigerator to grab another beer. "Exactly," I said, moving closer to him. "You should tell your son that. He's been trying to get me to slow down all evening." "Dad," Ethan said, his voice strained, "maybe you could help me convince Cori that—" "Oh, Ethan," I interrupted, rolling my eyes dramatically. "You worry too much. Your dad knows how to live a little. Don't you, Gerald?" I placed my hand on Gerald's arm as I spoke, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. He didn't pull away immediately, and I felt a little thrill of excitement. It had been so long since any man had looked at me the way Gerald was looking at me now. "Cori," Ethan said sharply, "we need to talk." "We're talking now," I said, not moving my hand from Gerald's arm. "Aren't we having a nice conversation, Gerald?" Gerald cleared his throat and gently stepped back. "Maybe I should check on Janet," he said, but his voice sounded a little rough around the edges. "Oh, don't run off," I said, following him toward the hallway. "The party's just getting started." Behind me, I heard Ethan sigh heavily, but I didn't care. I was tired of his constant worry, his boring routine, his complete lack of spontaneity. If he couldn't appreciate what he had, maybe it was time to remind him what he could lose. The hallway was dimmer than the kitchen, lit only by a small lamp on a side table. Gerald had stopped near the family photos that lined the walls, and I could see him studying a picture of Ethan's college graduation. "You must be so proud of him," I said, moving to stand beside him. "Though I have to say, he's gotten a lot more serious over the years." "Ethan's always been responsible," Gerald replied, but I noticed he didn't look at me when he spoke. "Maybe too responsible," I said, letting my shoulder brush against his arm. "Sometimes I think he's forgotten how to have fun." Gerald turned to face me then, and I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of beer. "Cori, you've had quite a bit to drink tonight." "So?" I challenged, looking up into his eyes. "Does that bother you?" "You're my son's wife," he said quietly, but he didn't step away. I'm also a woman, I replied, feeling bold and reckless, a woman who's tired of being taken for granted. The house suddenly felt very quiet around us. I could hear the distant murmur of conversation from the living room, the clink of glasses, the soft music playing from the stereo. But here in the hallway, it was just Gerald and me, standing closer than we should have been. "Cori," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the months of feeling invisible in my own marriage. Or maybe it was just the way Gerald was looking at me, like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. But suddenly, his hands were on my waist, and my lips were pressed against his, and for a moment, the world disappeared. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Gerald's lips were warm and firm, and he tasted like beer and something else I couldn't identify. When we broke apart, we both stood there breathing hard, staring at each other in shock. "Dad? Cori? Where did you guys go?" Ethan's voice from the kitchen made us both jump apart. Gerald ran a hand through his hair, looking anywhere but at me, while I quickly checked my reflection in the hallway mirror and smoothed down my dress. "We're here," Gerald called back, his voice sounding strangled. "Just looking at some old photos." I heard Ethan's footsteps approaching, and suddenly, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a cold slap. I had just kissed my husband's father, at his birthday party, in his childhood home, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. "There you are," Ethan said as he appeared in the hallway. "Mum's about to bring out the cake." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that he suspected something, but Ethan just looked tired and slightly annoyed. Gerald, on the other hand, couldn't seem to meet his son's eyes. "Great," I said brightly, linking my arm through Ethan's. "I love birthday cake." As we walked back toward the living room, I caught Gerald's eye over my shoulder. He looked stricken, guilty, and confused all at once. But there was something else there, too. Something that made my pulse quicken and my cheeks flush. I had crossed a line tonight, and there was no going back. The next morning hit me like a freight train. I woke up with a pounding headache and the sick feeling that comes with too much wine and too little sleep. Ethan was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at his phone. "Morning," I mumbled, pulling the covers over my head to block out the sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows. "It's almost noon," Ethan said without looking at me. "Sophie called 3 times, asking if you were okay. Apparently, you left quite an impression last night." The events of the previous evening came flooding back in vivid detail. The wine, the flirting, the kiss. Oh God, the kiss. I sat up slowly, trying to gauge Ethan's mood from his tone. "I might have had a little too much to drink," I admitted, testing the waters. "A little too much." Ethan finally turned to look at me, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Cori, you were all over my dad last night. My sister asked me 3 times if everything was okay with our marriage." My heart started racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I was being friendly. Your family is so uptight, Ethan. I was just trying to lighten the mood." "Friendly?" He stood up and started pacing the small bedroom. "You were hanging all over him. And then you both disappeared for 20 minutes. "We were looking at family photos," I said, the lie coming easily. "Your dad was telling me stories about when you were little." Ethan stopped pacing and stared at me. "For 20 minutes? Time flies when you're having an actual conversation," I snapped, feeling defensive. "Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as your dad did last night, I wouldn't have to seek out adult conversation elsewhere." I watched Ethan's face crumble slightly, and I felt a familiar satisfaction. This was how our arguments always went. He would accuse me of something, and I would turn it around until he was the one apologizing. "I pay attention to you," he said quietly. "Really? When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you looked at me the way your dad did last night?" I was gaining momentum now, building my case. "I'm 32 years old, Ethan. I'm not ready to become some boring suburban housewife who sits around arranging napkins all evening. My mother was hosting a party for her son, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Your mother was being controlling, just like always, and you just sit there and let her run everything, including our lives. I got out of bed and grabbed my robe, wrapping it tightly around myself. I was trying to have fun at your birthday party, and instead of appreciating that, you're making me feel guilty for talking to your father. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I glanced at the screen. It was a text from my best friend Margot. Girl, you were on fire last night. Call me. Ethan must have seen the message too, because his face darkened. What does that mean? It means I have a friend who appreciates when I'm having a good time, I said, grabbing my phone and heading toward the bathroom. Unlike my husband, I locked the bathroom door behind me and immediately called Margot. She answered on the first ring. Cori. Oh my God, Paul couldn't stop talking about last night after we got home. He said you were flirting with Gerald all evening, and Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. I was not flirting, I said automatically, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. Honey, please, I saw the way you were looking at that man. And honestly, good for you. Ethan takes you completely for granted, and Gerald is still a very attractive man for his age. Margot had always been my enabler, the friend who encouraged my worst impulses and told me what I wanted to hear. She'd been married to Paul for 6 years, and while their marriage seemed solid, she lived vicariously through my drama. Ethan is being ridiculous about it, I said, lowering my voice. He's acting like I committed some crime by having a conversation with his father. Men are so insecure, Margot agreed. Paul was the same way when I danced with his brother at their cousin's wedding. They can't handle it when their women show any independence. Exactly, and honestly, maybe Ethan needs a wake-up call. Maybe he needs to realize that other men find me attractive. Did something happen? Margot asked, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. Like, really happen? I hesitated for a moment, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was messy, my makeup was smudged, and I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had made a terrible mistake the night before. We kissed, I whispered. Margot gasped. Oh my God, Cori, you kissed Gerald? It just happened. We were talking in the hallway, and there was all this tension and... I trailed off, not sure how to explain the rush of excitement I'd felt in that moment. How was it? Margot asked breathlessly. Amazing, I admitted. He kissed me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world. When was the last time Ethan kissed me like that? This is huge, Margot said. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said quickly. It was a mistake. I was drunk. He was drunk. It didn't mean anything. But how do you feel about it? That was the question I'd been avoiding since I woke up. How did I feel about it? Guilty? Yes. Excited? Also, yes. Confused? Absolutely. I feel like I'm trapped in a marriage with a man who doesn't see me anymore, I said finally. And last night, for just a few minutes, I felt alive again. Then maybe this is exactly what you needed, Margot said. Maybe this is your chance to figure out what you really want. A loud knock on the bathroom door interrupted our conversation. Cori, Ethan called. My sister is here. She wants to talk to us. My stomach dropped. Abigail had always been protective of Ethan, and she'd never particularly liked me. If she suspected something had happened last night... I have to go, I whispered to Margot. I'll call you later. I hung up and took a deep breath before opening the bathroom door. Ethan was standing there with his arms crossed, and I could hear voices from the living room. What does she want? I asked. She says she needs to talk to us about last night, Ethan replied. She seemed pretty upset. I followed Ethan to the living room, where Abigail was sitting on our couch with her arms crossed, looking like a judge about to deliver a verdict. At 27, she had always been the responsible one in the family, and she had a way of making me feel like a scolded child. Abigail, I said, forcing a smile. What a nice surprise. Sit down, Cori, she said without returning my smile. We need to talk. I perched on the edge of the armchair across from her, while Ethan sat heavily on the couch beside his sister. I'm going to be direct, Abigail said, looking straight at me. Your behavior last night was completely inappropriate, and it's affecting this family. I don't know what you mean, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. You were all over our father, Cori. Everyone saw it. Mum is devastated, Ethan is humiliated, and frankly, I'm disgusted. I was being friendly, I started, but Abigail cut me off. You were being inappropriate, and when you and Dad disappeared into the house together, people started talking. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. We were looking at photos. For 20 minutes, with your lipstick smudged when you came back out. The room went completely silent. I could feel Ethan staring at me, could see the pieces clicking together in his mind. My lipstick wasn't smudged, I said, but the words sounded hollow. I saw you, Cori. I saw you both, and I know something happened in that hallway. Ethan stood up suddenly, his face pale. What are you saying, Abby? Abigail looked at her brother with sympathy and sadness. I'm saying that your wife crossed a line last night, and Dad knows it too. He called me this morning, Ethan. He's beside himself with guilt. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to be in control of this situation. You're all overreacting, I said, standing up as well. I had a few drinks and got a little friendly, that's all. If you want to turn that into some kind of scandal, that's your choice. A little friendly? Abigail's voice was rising. You kissed our father, didn't you? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I looked at Ethan, saw the desperate hope in his eyes that I would deny it, that I would make this all go away. But I was tired of being the villain in their family drama. And what if I did? I said defiantly. What if I kissed him? What if I'm tired of being ignored and taken for granted? What if I'm tired of pretending to be happy in a marriage that died years ago? Ethan made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Abigail's mouth fell open. So you admit it, she whispered. I admit that I kissed a man who made me feel beautiful and wanted for the first time in years, I said, the words pouring out of me now. I admit that I'm tired of being married to someone who treats me like a piece of furniture. Ethan was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You kissed my father. I kissed a man who paid attention to me, I corrected. Something you haven't done in years. He's my father, Cori. He's married to my mother. You're married to me. Maybe that's the problem, I shot back. Maybe I married the wrong man. The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately saw the devastation they caused. Ethan actually staggered backward, and Abigail jumped up from the couch. Get out, she said quietly. This is my house, I replied. Get out of this family, she clarified. Get out and stay out. You've done enough damage. You can't kick me out of my own marriage, I said, but even as I spoke, I could see that something fundamental had shifted. The power I'd always held over Ethan was crumbling before my eyes. Watch me, Abigail said, then turned to her brother. Ethan, you deserve so much better than this. We all do. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to look back at me one more time. You'll regret this, she said, all of it. After she left, Ethan and I stood in our living room staring at each other. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. How long? He asked finally. How long what? How long have you felt this way? How long have you been thinking about my father? How long has our marriage been dead to you? I wanted to take it all back, to tell him I'd been drunk and angry and stupid. But looking at his broken face, I realized I couldn't lie anymore. I don't know, I whispered. I don't know when it started, but I can't pretend anymore, Ethan. I can't pretend to be happy. He nodded slowly, like he was processing information he'd suspected for a long time. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Then he walked to our bedroom and closed the door, leaving me alone with the wreckage of everything I'd just destroyed. The next few days passed in a blur of whispered phone calls and slammed doors. Ethan barely spoke to me, leaving for work early and coming home late. When he was home, he spent most of his time in his home office with the door locked, and I could hear him talking quietly on the phone. I tried to go about my normal routine, showing up to work at the dental clinic where I'd been a receptionist for the past 4 years. But even there, I could feel the weight of judgment following me around. "Cori, honey," Dr. Martinez said on Wednesday morning, "can I see you in my office for a minute?" My stomach dropped. Dr. Martinez was a kind man in his 50s who rarely got involved in office drama, so if he was calling me into his office, it couldn't be good news. "Is everything okay?" I asked, following him into the small room behind the reception desk. "That's what I wanted to ask you," he said, settling behind his desk. "Lisa mentioned that you've seemed a little distracted lately, and I got a call from Janet Vale yesterday." My blood ran cold. Janet was one of our longtime patients, but more importantly, she was Ethan's mother. "What did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She wanted to change her appointment to a time when you wouldn't be here," Dr. Martinez said gently. "She seemed very upset, but she wouldn't tell me why." "Cori, is there something going on at home that I should know about?" I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Ethan and I are going through a rough patch," I admitted. "It's affecting his relationship with his family." Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry to hear that. Marriage can be challenging. But Cori, I need you to understand that this is a small community, and our practice depends on maintaining good relationships with our patients. If there's family drama affecting our patient base—" "I understand," I said quickly. "I'll talk to Janet. I'll fix this." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. There was no fixing what I'd done. There was no going back to the way things were before that night at the party. When I got home that evening, I found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up when I walked in, and I was shocked by how much weight he seemed to have lost in just a few days. "We need to talk," he said. I sat down across from him, noticing that he'd removed his wedding ring. The tan line, where it used to be, stood out starkly against his pale skin. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "about our marriage being dead, about you marrying the wrong man. Ethan, I was angry—" "Were you wrong?" he interrupted. "Because I've been going over everything in my mind, trying to figure out when we stop being happy, and I think you might be right." I stared at him, not sure how to respond. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected. "I think we've been going through the motions for a long time," he continued. "I think we both knew this marriage was in trouble, but neither of us wanted to admit it." "So, what are you saying?" I asked. He pushed one of the papers across the table to me. "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop pretending." I looked down at the document and felt my world tilt sideways. It was a consultation form from a divorce attorney. "You went to a lawyer?" I whispered. "I had a consultation," he said. "I wanted to understand my options." "Ethan, you can't be serious. One fight doesn't mean we should get divorced." "This isn't about one fight, Cori. This is about you kissing my father. This is about you telling me you married the wrong man. This is about the fact that you've been unhappy for years, and instead of talking to me about it, you decided to blow up our entire family." His voice was getting stronger as he spoke, and I realized that the quiet, passive man I'd married was disappearing before my eyes. "I made a mistake," I said desperately. "I was drunk, I was upset, I wasn't thinking clearly." "Which part was the mistake?" he asked. "Kissing my father, or telling me the truth about how you feel about our marriage?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure. "I love you," I said finally, though the words felt strange in my mouth. "Do you?" he asked. "Or do you love the security of being married? Do you love having someone to pay half the bills and give you a respectable life?" The questions hit too close to home. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you told me you loved me without wanting something? When was the last time you seemed happy to see me when I came home from work?" I couldn't answer, because I couldn't remember. I called my dad yesterday, Ethan said quietly. We had a long conversation. My heart started racing. What did he say? He told me everything, about how you'd been flirting with him all evening, about how you followed him into the hallway, about how you initiated the kiss. That's not true, I protested, though I wasn't entirely sure it wasn't. He also told me that this isn't the first time you've made him uncomfortable. He said you've been making comments and touching him inappropriately at family gatherings for months. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. I was being friendly. You were being inappropriate with my father, and I was too blind to see it. Ethan's voice was getting harder now. How long, Cori? How long have you been planning this? I wasn't planning anything, it just happened. Did it, or did you see an opportunity to hurt me in the most devastating way possible, and you took it? The accusation hung between us like a poison cloud, and the worst part was, I wasn't sure he was wrong. I want you to move out, Ethan said quietly. This is my house too, I said automatically. Actually, it's not. The house is in my name. I bought it before we got married, remember? You can stay in the guest room for now, but I want you to start looking for your own place. I felt panic rising in my chest. Ethan, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. I don't want to work this out, he said, and the finality in his voice terrified me. I want a divorce. You don't mean that. I do. I've already filed the paperwork. The room started spinning around me. When? This morning. You'll be served officially within the next few days. I stared at him, this man I'd been married to for 8 years, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Where was the passive, accommodating husband who always gave in to what I wanted? What about Sophie? I asked desperately. She loves me. You can't keep her away from me. Sophie isn't our daughter, Cori. She's my niece. And after what you did to this family, I don't think Abigail is going to want her spending much time with you. The full weight of what I'd lost hit me all at once. Not just my marriage, but my entire life. My family, my social circle, my place in the community. All of it was disappearing because of one moment of stupidity. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry, Ethan. He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of the old softness in his eyes. I know you are, he said, but sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo what you did to my family. Sorry doesn't make me able to trust you again. He stood up and gathered his papers. I'm going to stay at Paul's house for a few days while you figure out where you're going to go. But Cori, this is really happening. This marriage is over. After he left, I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at the divorce consultation form and trying to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely in just a few days. My phone buzzed with a text from Margot. How are you holding up? Want to grab drinks tonight? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Yes, I need to get out of here. Because if my marriage was really over, if I'd really lost everything, then I might as well stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. Margot picked me up at 7, and we drove to the local bar and grill where we'd spent countless evenings over the years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, which meant that by tomorrow morning, the entire town would know that Cori Vale was out drinking alone while her husband was staying at a friend's house. You look terrible, Margot said as we slid into a booth in the back corner. Thanks, I replied sarcastically. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'm just being honest. When was the last time you slept? I couldn't remember. The past few days had been a blur of anxiety, regret, and desperate attempts to figure out how to fix the unfixable. Ethan filed for divorce, I said without preamble. Margot's eyes widened. Already? Wow, he doesn't mess around. This is serious, Margot. I'm about to lose everything. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, she said, signaling the waitress for 2 margaritas. Maybe this is your chance to start fresh, find someone who actually appreciates you. I don't want to start fresh. I want my life back. The life where you were miserable and bored? The life where your husband treated you like a roommate instead of a wife? The waitress brought our drinks, and I took a large gulp, hoping the alcohol would numb the panic that had been building in my chest for days. At least I had security, I said. At least I had a place in this community. You can build a new place. You're still young, you're attractive, you have a job. You don't need Ethan to define who you are. As if summoned by our conversation, I looked up to see Paul and several of Ethan's other friends walking into the restaurant. My stomach dropped when I realized that Ethan was with them. "Oh God," I whispered. "They're here." Margot turned around to look, then turned back to me with excitement in her eyes. "Perfect. This is your chance to show Ethan what he's giving up." "Margot, no, I should leave." "You should stay and hold your head up high. You have every right to be here." But as I watched Ethan and his friends get seated at a table across the restaurant, I could see them glancing in our direction and whispering. The weight of their judgment felt crushing. "They're talking about me," I said. "Let them talk. You know what? Let's give them something to really talk about." Before I could stop her, Margot was waving at their table. "Paul, hi! Come say hello!" I wanted to sink through the floor as Paul reluctantly walked over to our booth. He'd been friends with Ethan since college, and while he'd always been polite to me, I could see the coldness in his eyes now. "Margot," he said stiffly. "Cori." "Sit with us for a minute," Margot said, scooting over to make room. "We never get to see you anymore." Paul glanced back at Ethan's table, clearly uncomfortable. "I can't stay long. We're just grabbing dinner." "How's Ethan doing?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. Paul's expression hardened. "How do you think he's doing, Cori?" "I know he's upset, but—" "Upset?" Paul's voice was getting louder, and I could see people at nearby tables starting to look over. "Cori, you kissed his father, at his birthday party, in front of his entire family. Upset doesn't begin to cover it." "It was a mistake," I said quickly. "I was drunk, I wasn't thinking clearly." "You humiliated him," Paul continued, and I could see years of frustration boiling over. "You humiliated his entire family. Do you have any idea what you've done to that man?" "Paul," Margot interjected, "maybe you should calm down." "No," Paul said, turning to face her. "I'm tired of pretending this is okay. I'm tired of watching my friend fall apart because his wife decided to blow up their marriage for kicks." "That's not what happened," I protested, but Paul wasn't listening. "You know what the worst part is?" he said, looking directly at me. "Ethan still loves you. Even after everything you've done, he's sitting over there beating himself up, wondering if there was something he could have done differently." "Then why won't he talk to me?" I asked desperately. "Because he finally realized that you don't love him back. Because he finally understood that you've been using him for years." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true." "Isn't it? When was the last time you did something nice for him just because you wanted to make him happy? When was the last time you supported his dreams instead of complaining about how boring your life is?" I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out, because deep down I knew he was right. "You had a good man who would have done anything for you," Paul continued, "and you threw it away because you were bored. Well, congratulations, Cori. You're not bored anymore." He stood up to leave, then paused and looked down at me one more time. "And just so you know, Gerald is devastated. He's been married to Janet for 35 years, and now she can barely look at him. You didn't just destroy your own marriage, you nearly destroyed theirs too." After Paul walked away, I sat in stunned silence, staring at my half-empty margarita. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal buzz of conversation, but I felt like I was sitting in a bubble of shame and isolation. "He's just upset," Margot said finally. "He'll get over it." But I could see the doubt in her eyes now. For the first time since this whole mess started, Margot was beginning to understand the true scope of what I'd done. "Maybe I should apologize," I said quietly. "For what? For refusing to be taken for granted. For kissing my father-in-law, for humiliating my husband, for destroying 2 marriages." "You didn't destroy anything," Margot said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Gerald is a grown man. He made his own choices." I looked across the restaurant at Ethan, who was sitting with his back to me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Even from a distance, I could see the weight of sadness he was carrying. "I need to go talk to him," I said, starting to stand up. "Cori, don't. You've done enough damage for one night." But I was already walking across the restaurant, my heart pounding with each step. I had to fix this. I had to make him understand that I never meant for things to go this far. "Ethan," I said when I reached their table, "can I talk to you for a minute?" The conversation at the table stopped abruptly. Ethan's friends looked uncomfortable, but Ethan just looked tired. "Not here, Cori," he said quietly. "Please, just 5 minutes." I said not here. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice getting louder as desperation took over. "I'm sorry about everything. I made a terrible mistake, and I know that, but we can fix this." "Cori," Ethan said, standing up, "you need to leave." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "You need to listen to me. I love you. I know I haven't been a good wife, but I can change. We can go to counseling. We can start over." "Let go of me," Ethan said, pulling his arm away. But I couldn't let go. This was my last chance, my only opportunity to save what was left of my life. "I'll do anything," I said, and I could hear my voice getting shrill. "I'll quit my job. We can move away from here, start fresh somewhere else." "Cori, stop," Ethan said firmly. "You're making a scene." And I was. I could feel the entire restaurant watching us, could see phones being pulled out to record the drama. But I didn't care anymore. "I don't care who's watching," I said loudly. "I care about saving my marriage." "Your marriage was over the moment you kissed my father," Ethan said, his voice cold and final. "Now please, leave me alone." He sat back down and turned away from me, effectively dismissing me in front of everyone we knew. The humiliation was complete. I stood there for a moment, swaying slightly from the alcohol and the shock, before turning and walking back to Margot's table on unsteady legs. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing my purse. "Cori, now. We need to leave now." As we walked out of the restaurant, I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes following us. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Cori Vale had made a drunken scene, begging her husband to take her back after she'd cheated on him with his own father. The drive home was silent, except for my quiet sobbing. When Margot dropped me off at my empty house, she squeezed my hand and said, "It'll get better, I promise." But as I walked into the dark, silent house that no longer felt like home, I knew she was wrong. It wasn't going to get better. It was only going to get worse. And I had no one to blame but myself. I woke up the next morning to the sound of someone knocking on my front door. For a moment I thought maybe it was Ethan coming home, ready to talk things through. But when I opened the door, I found a man in a suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Corisande de Vale?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice hoarse from crying. "You've been served." He handed me the envelope and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway in my pajamas, holding my divorce papers. I sat down on my couch and opened the envelope with shaking hands. The legal language was cold and clinical, but the message was clear. Ethan wanted to dissolve our marriage, divide our assets, and move on with his life as quickly as possible. There was a note attached, written in Ethan's careful handwriting. "Cori, I've arranged for you to have 2 weeks to find a new place to live. I'll be staying at Paul's until then. Please don't contact me except through my attorney. Ethan." 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to find a new home, rebuild my life, and figure out how to survive as a divorced woman in a town where everyone knew my business. My phone rang, and I grabbed it desperately, hoping it might be Ethan. But it was Dr. Martinez. "Cori," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I need you to come in today. We need to discuss your employment situation." My heart sank. Am I being fired? Let's just say we need to have a conversation about what's best for everyone involved. An hour later, I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, trying to maintain what was left of my dignity, while he explained that several patients had requested to schedule their appointments when I wouldn't be there. I'm sorry, Cori, he said. I know you're going through a difficult time, but I have to think about what's best for the practice. So you're firing me because my marriage is falling apart. I'm letting you go because your personal life is affecting our patient relationships. Janet Vale has been a patient here for 15 years. The Hendersons, the Johnsons, the Millers, they're all family friends of the Vales, and they're all uncomfortable with the situation. The situation that everyone is gossiping about but no one actually knows the facts about? Dr. Martinez sighed. Cori, this is a small town. When the wife of one of our most respected families has an affair with her father-in-law, it becomes everyone's business whether we like it or not. It wasn't an affair, I protested weakly. What would you call it? I stared at him, unable to answer. Because what could I call it? A mistake? A moment of weakness? A symptom of a dying marriage? None of those explanations would save my job or my reputation. I'll give you 2 weeks' severance, Dr. Martinez said kindly. And I'll provide a good reference for your work performance. But Cori, you might want to consider looking for opportunities outside of this area. Outside of this area. He was suggesting I leave town entirely. This is my home, I said quietly. I know, and I'm sorry it's come to this. When I got home, I found Margot sitting on my front steps, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking uncharacteristically serious. I brought caffeine, she said, handing me a cup. Figured you might need it. We sat in silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee and watching the neighborhood go about its normal Friday routine. Kids riding bikes, neighbors mowing lawns, mail carriers making their rounds. Life continuing as if my world hadn't completely collapsed. Paul and I had a fight last night, Margot said finally. About what? About you, about this whole situation. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He thinks I've been encouraging you to make bad choices. Have you been? Margot was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. I don't know. I've been living vicariously through your drama because my own life is so boring. But Paul made me realize that real people are getting hurt here. Including me, I said. Including you. But Cori, you have to take responsibility for your part in this. You can't keep blaming everyone else. I felt a flash of anger. So you're abandoning me too? I'm not abandoning you, but I can't keep pretending that what you did was okay just because you were unhappy in your marriage. I thought you were my friend. I am your friend. That's why I'm telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear. Margot turned to face me directly. You kissed your husband's father, Cori. You humiliated him in front of his entire family. You've been flirting with Gerald for months, making everyone uncomfortable, and then you acted shocked when it finally went too far. I never meant for this to happen. But you did mean to hurt Ethan, didn't you? You were angry at him for being boring, for not paying enough attention to you, so you decided to get back at him in the cruelest way possible. The accusation hung between us like a bomb, and the worst part was, I couldn't deny it, because deep down, I knew she was right. Maybe I did, I whispered. Maybe I wanted to hurt him. Why? Because I felt invisible. Because I felt like I was disappearing in that marriage, becoming this person I didn't recognize. Because I was tired of being grateful for a man who paid the bills and showed up but never really saw me. So you decided to blow everything up instead of trying to fix it. I didn't decide anything. It just happened. Bullshit, Margot said, and I was shocked by the harshness in her voice. Nothing just happens, Cori. You made a series of choices that led to that moment. You chose to flirt with Gerald. You chose to drink too much. You chose to follow him into that hallway. You chose to kiss him. I started crying again, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I know I did this, but I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, Margot said gently. That's what you need to understand. Some things can't be undone. We sat there for another hour, talking about practical things like apartments and job searches and starting over. When Margot left, she hugged me tight and promised to help however she could, but I could see the distance in her eyes now. Our friendship would never be the same. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Gerald. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at Miller's Park tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Yes." Maybe it was time to face the other person whose life I'd helped destroy. Maybe it was time to finally understand what I'd really done and why I'd done it. Or maybe I was just making another terrible decision in a long line of terrible decisions. But at this point, what did I have left to lose? Miller's Park was nearly empty when I arrived. Gerald sat by the pond feeding ducks, looking older, heavier with guilt. He said counseling suggested closure. Janet was devastated. I apologized and he asked if I was sorry or just caught. I admitted I'd felt invisible and grabbed at attention without thinking. Gerald confessed the worst part. For a moment, he'd enjoyed it, and that weakness cost him everything. He told me to rebuild my life without hurting others. That evening, Ethan moved his things out. When I begged to talk, he said quietly, "You already ended us." I watched the truck disappear, knowing my marriage was truly over.